Hi, this is John Pettigrew, and you're listening to Talking Through My Hat, a podcast that explores bookish businesses, the fantastic people who create them, and what those people have learned. I'm a hat wearer, a recovering editor, and the creator of Future Proofs, enabling editors and authors to work better online. To find out more, visit wearefutureproofs.com or follow me on Twitter at John_Pettigrew. Welcome to this week's Talking Through My Hat. Today I'm talking with Richard Nash, serial entrepreneur, award-winning editor and publisher, and perhaps one of the publishing industry's most recognisable figures. Over the years he's founded theatre companies, run small publishers, been part of the leadership team at Small Demons and Byliner, and consulted for companies from startups to Sony. He now runs Cursor, which started as a community publishing platform and has now pivoted into a consultancy and coaching business of publishers. So welcome to the podcast, Richard.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much.
It's quite a journey from theatre companies to tech startups. How did you kind of end up in publishing?
Well, I mean, good Lord, when I was a kid, I thought I was going to be running a soft drink business in rural Southwest Ireland.
Okay.
I was the sixth in a row of Richard Nash's.
Okay.
5 of whom ran a small family-owned soft drink company in a town called Newcastle West in County Limerick. Really started by my great-great-grandmother Johanna Nash, who invented something called Nash's Red Lemonade. So the very fact of coming to America and going to college here and initially deciding I wasn't going to take over the family business, I was going to do a PhD in political science.
Okay, not quite the same.
That was pivot number one. Pivot number two was deciding I was going to move to New York and do avant-garde theater. So taking over a publisher, an independent publisher in 2001 was actually pivot number 3 for me.
Okay.
I'm not somebody who subscribes much to the sunk cost fallacy.
Okay, dokes. Yeah.
I guess. So with publishing, it really was it was a complete bloody accident. The way these things are. I was directing several plays over several years by a playwright who happened to have a micro publisher called Soft Skull. And I just was sort of helping him out with it. I had a day job because avant-garde theater is not
profitable.
Working for Oxford University Press.
Okay.
In the late 90s, I was the permissions department. Strangely enough, while back at the time, permissions within academic publishing, as you probably know, was a little bit of a place, it was a gig sort of run by the troll in the basement of the contracts department. It wasn't sort of a career path within the industry.
Yeah.
But oddly enough, you got to encounter everybody. One of the things that publishing often suffers from is the way in which it's siloed.
Yeah. Very
that,
much so.
Editorial, manufacturing, production, marketing, sales, they're all in there. And permissions kind of had random different reasons to touch everybody. So in my own way, even though at the time it was not anything other than a source of health insurance, I was learning by osmosis.
Yeah.
And so when the guy who was running Soft Skull kind of had a bit of a meltdown, he had 2 staff aged, I believe, 20 and 22 years old. And he had basically done a runner. So I offered to help them out because I was 30. I was
wise in the ways of the world by then.
And it basically began by me negotiating with printers.
Okay.
and authors because we hadn't paid the printers and we hadn't paid the authors.
Okay. So they wanted to talk to you.
And so they wanted to talk to someone.
Yeah.
They wanted someone call me back and tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
And so I called them and told them what was going on. Um, and but with the printers, what I had to do was not only say, I don't know why you haven't been paid, and we don't have the money to pay you, but I also had to say, and you actually have to keep printing for us
Yeah.
because we'll never have the money to pay you if we can't print books.
Yep.
But as it turned out, being that ignorant was actually very, very helpful because I had no assumptions about how the industry worked.
Yeah.
I had to go and find out how it worked, and I also had to find out how it was working in the 2001 2002 incarnation of it,
Yeah.
where things were already beginning to change. We sold 10% of our books via our website. We had a fan base. It wasn't a big fan base, but there was a fan base. There were people who knew what Soft Skull was, readers who knew what Soft Skull was.
Yeah.
And so that was the publishing I learned. I learned that you could sell books off your website. I learned that people cared about your brand. I learned that there was a supply chain about which I knew almost nothing, but I was taught by our distributor how the supply chain worked because I asked them. But there was a sort of a larger philosophy around that, which was a sense that you were engaging with readers and that your job was to connect with readers, and that the supply chain was a means to an end, and not an end in itself. And what I probably learned above all, although I think it's really only in recent years that I've been able to articulate it this way, is that balance of scale and intimacy that feels to me to be at the very, very core of how publishing works as a business. That combination of one-on-one engagement, either face-to-face or one, email address to another email address, and scale, a website where anybody can go to it and buy something no matter where in the world they are. The fact that selling 5,000 books is not that much more than expensive than selling 2,000 books, and selling 35,000 books is even less expensive, proportionally. So that traditional economies of scale are real and unavoidable. So that very sense that your job was to engage with an individual who was either going to buy one book or influence people to buy one book or influence people to buy significantly more than one book. But that was what you did. And you tried to figure out ways to make that activity as efficient as possible by using scale wherever it could be used. A newsletter, rather than, you send one email, introduce yourself, then you can send that person automatic emails once a month. This is not remotely rocket science, but what it was the very, very fundamental. It was just baked into how Soft Skull operated at the very, very beginning, and that's sort of what has allowed Soft Skull to keep going as long as it did, and be representative of a wide range of other publishers that were started somewhat around the same time, and have continued on in various ways too.
So what was it that took you out of being a publisher in a kind of and putting all that stuff together to the wonderful world of startups?
I guess, it was, well, part of it is that our distributor went bankrupt
Okay.
on the very last day of the calendar year of 2006. I could give a 5-minute disquisition on how particularly evil that was, but let's just say that is, as many people know in publishing, your sales tilt toward the second half of the year because of the holidays, and shockingly, they show up in bankruptcy court in the state of Delaware on the very last day of December at 9 a.m. and declare bankruptcy.
Hmm.
So I had to find a white knight, found a white knight, and that was fine. It went well, but there was less of an appetite in the new structure,
Hmm.
or less of a sense of urgency, let's say.
Yeah.
I felt a real sense of urgency. Um, I did not want to get left behind.
Yeah.
And so I needed to kind of leap into a structure that would allow me to explore what was next.
Okay.
Um, and in some ways, while there were various, I basically kind of did one thing in the 90s, and I did theater, and I did one thing in the 2000s, which was publishing with Soft Skull.
Hmm.
This decade, the 2000 teens, and I don't think the 2020s are going to be any different, has been much more of a whirlwind. To some degree, for myself, it has been a search to try to figure out where in the world do I add the most amount of value,
Hmm.
and how in the world can I capture enough of that value to make a living.
Yeah. Sounds like a business plan.
Sounds like a search for a business
Well,
plan.
yes. Absolutely. So I guess that takes us naturally to this. How do you describe what you do now, I guess, with Cursor?
I mean, so Cursor was what I named the corporation I set up as soon as I left Soft Skull, or within a few months of leaving Soft
Mm.
Skull. And I liked it because it suggested a blank page and a
Hmm.
new start. At the time, what I thought I was going to be doing was building a series of tools
Okay.
that would allow any publisher, and indeed entities who are not yet publishers, be they individuals or, in my opinion at the time, even more likely, institutions, anybody who wanted to publish and anybody who wanted to avail of that nexus of community and engagement that content often produces.
Hmm.
Um, what might nowadays, and maybe even a little bit at the time, was already starting to be called content marketing.
Mm.
Um, uh, and I created a sort of an imprint called Red Lemonade that would be a publisher that would use the tools that Cursor was creating.
Hmm.
Uh, but what I learned is that what did I learn? I learned that publishing is not one industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Publishing is a bazillion different industries,
Yeah. Very much so.
all of which, the only thing they have in common, as I once joked about with the former head of Singapore University Press, the only thing they have in common is they print and buy things, and they go to the Frankfurt Book Fair. It was kind of a circular definition. You're a
Yeah.
publisher because you go to the Frankfurt Book Fair. You go to the Frankfurt Book Fair because you're a publisher.
Yeah.
But when you look at, what you look there is you've got the medical industry, the travel
Mm.
industry, the education business, the business of educating professionals, the business of educating kindergartners.
Yeah. It's this thing you're saying. What have academic publishing and erotic fiction really got to do with one another?
Absolutely
Yeah.
nothing in a cultural standpoint.
Yeah.
The only thing they have in common
Yeah.
is that as part of their either as one of their many productizations, which would be the case of the food industry, one of the many
Yeah.
productization is cookbooks, or as a part of the value chain, as in the case of what we think of in terms of trade book publishing,
Hmm.
um, they printed and bound something.
Yeah.
And so that got called an industry, but the use cases were just so spectacularly different. And to try to build a platform, a series of
Yeah.
tools, given how disparate the use cases were, was, with hindsight, crazy. And even if I focused in on the community out of which I came, literary and slightly edgier trade publishing, you're talking about a whole group of people who are really, they get along, but they're not known with one another. They're great at partying together, but
Yeah.
they don't all adopt a piece of software simultaneously.
Yeah.
I learned, God, so much. I learned so much by trying to do that.
Uh-huh.
And I certainly see that the fundamental principles that I was getting at cropping up all over the place. I mean, one of the things that I really wanted to have happen was just have publishers in this area, especially poetry,
Mm.
literary, memoir, serious narrative nonfiction, of them getting into the teaching business, given that the teaching, it's the U.S. MFA industry is worth $2 billion a year.
Yeah.
Why are publishers not getting a bigger chunk of that? And Faber was already starting to do that in the UK, and um, delightfully, a company I was sort of involved in helping set up in the very, very early days, and a company that then actually ended up acquiring Soft Skull, Catapult, in the US, independent trade publisher, is a very, very strong business doing writing workshops.
Yeah.
So it was, the philosophy was, how, instead of thinking of ourselves really as, instead of having a business that just uses books instead of, I don't know, boxes of cereal in some elaborate manufacturing supply chain, why don't we think about what are we doing? What is it that we really do? Is we bring
Yeah.
together writers and readers? What are some of the other ways in which we can bring together writers and readers?
Yeah. And sometimes the best way of learning stuff, isn't it, is to put yourself in a position where you have to ask a lot of questions rather than taking what you always thought of as the answers.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, that's effectively what I was doing in the early 2000s when I was starting or
Yeah.
when I was starting my own version of restarting Soft Skull, and that was effectively what I was doing in the early 2000 teens when I was trying to figure out startups. I mean, and probably my biggest mistakes have always been when I have gone into manifesto mode rather than
Yeah.
interrogation mode, or when I go into manifesto mode too early or something like that.
Mm.
But what's funny about what you just say is that what I'm what Cursor is doing now is sort of threefold.
Mm-hmm.
One is that I did realize, after I'd been through a variety of startups and consulting gigs, I did realize there was a little interesting gap in the market, um, in the U.S., which was the ability to allow non-American independent publishers to publish on a level playing field with domestic independent publishers.
Okay.
So increasingly, the leading English language, and in some cases, not even just English language, publishers in the world have opted to publish directly in the US
Mm-hmm.
rather than just license to
Yeah.
US publishers. Um, and obviously, the internet ability to communicate at distance and at more scale
Yeah.
helps. But also just the fact that, and the fact that readers are also connecting.
Yeah.
It's there are Americans who are following some Australians' Instagram feed of kids' books that are like, oh my God, that thing looks amazing. While cultures are distinct, and you can't, there hasn't been a complete flattening of Anglophone global culture. Uh, there's definitely scope for smaller companies to be able to operate in the U.S., but they needed boots on the ground
Mm-hmm.
Here, because of the fact that, yes, there are some things that are the same, and then there's other things that are different.
Yeah.
And for the bits that are different, I and another friend of mine who worked in American independent publishing, a woman named Emily Cook, who was at a press called Milkweed,
Mm-hmm.
who was at Granta, helping run Granta in the U.S. we got together and set up an office. It basically does the marketing and publicity on a kind of a retainer basis for a group of international independent publishers. Icon from the UK, Scribe, that's UK and Australia, and Greystone and Coach House in Canada. So that took a while to get set up. Now that it's set up, we have a team of 4 in Minneapolis. So I knew that wasn't going to be the only thing I would do, because I knew that to kind of go back to the earlier frame, I knew I could not add and capture enough value with that structure to allow me to make the money that I needed to make in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
If I were in Minneapolis, it would be a different story.
Yeah.
But
we do like to centralize in particular locations sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, you guys have it even worse in the UK, man. But
it's all in London. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I started to do was I sort of began to realize that I'd been doing something for a long time and I didn't know what it was called. But I realize now it's called coaching.
Okay.
I was doing it, I probably have advised about 25, 30 different startups that were interested in getting into book publishing in one way, shape, or form, or ed tech. But and they came to me because they wanted my industry connections. But I found that really half the time I was just kind of talking them through what it was like to do a startup, why they wanted to do a startup, where they were in their professional and personal lives that was motivating them to do it.
Yeah.
That I was in many ways doing the same thing with authors. Authors would come looking for an agent, or a friend who was not a writer was like, I'm thinking of doing a book.
Yeah.
And I found again and again that the kind of conversations I was having were really much more about situating their question in a larger landscape. And in the past year, I discovered that the entire universe of executive coaching and life coaching is basically a sort of a formal version of that. I realized there too that it's about asking questions rather than giving answers.
Yeah.
I mean, people often think their coaches are there to tell them what to do. But when you actually go through a coaching experience, you don't always notice it. But what is in fact happening is the coach is asking you questions.
Yeah.
And eliciting your own, by asking you the right questions, and by asking you often the very simple questions, not weird, elaborate, domain-specific questions, but very simple questions, not dissimilarly from what happens sometimes in a author-editor process. What do you really want? What do you want to do here? Editors aren't, invoking Barth or post-structuralism when they're asking, like, what do you want to say here?
Do you find that you take away a lot from that practice as well, from the answers you hear people give?
Yeah. I mean, that's why sometimes, I mean, it must be part of the reason you must do this series is it allows you to do that. Part of the reason I agree to do things like this is that I learn from questions.
Yeah.
I learn from the questions. To some degree, it's yet another pivot in my professional life, but it feels like a pivot. Feels a little bit more like, your life begins sort of 2/3 of the way up a mountain, and it's a small but fast trickle. It's really carving It's intense. It's carving a path.
Yeah.
Um, it gurgles and splashes and rushes, and it's powerful and it's twisting. It's twisting and twisting and twisting.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a point at which it starts to get kind of closer to the ocean and it starts to spread out. You're not that sense of being flung to the left and flung to the right, but instead there's somewhat steadier, it's somewhat easier. You get to see, by the time you get to that, topography,
Yeah.
you're in a topography that is flatter. You can see the sky, you can see the mountains in the distance. You have a sense as to where you are in your landscape.
I mean, as you look back over kind of all of the different things you've done, what is it that you find hardest about kind of running a business, keeping it going?
Deciding what not to do, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not going to say that that's as a universal principle, but I certainly think that there is going to be a subset of the world, and I'm firmly in it,
Hmm.
for whom deciding what not to do is so much more important. My girlfriend is a novelist. Uh, she has said, I have no problem coming up with ideas.
Mm.
I can come up with, a 1 or 2 page treatment idea. If she really wanted to, she'd probably come up with one a day.
Yeah.
Ideas are not the issue. And there was a startup guy, I don't know who it was. It was somebody on Twitter quoting him,
Mm.
but I'll never forget the sentence. The sentence was 2 sentences. I don't worry about other people stealing my ideas. I usually have to shove them down people's throats. So
Yeah.
ideas are everywhere.
Yeah.
Um,
Ideas are easy.
Ideas are you again. It may be that some people idea generation comes a little more
Yeah.
readily, and that other people, they're naturally creative and resourceful. They probably just don't think they're good at creating ideas.
Mm.
They could actually probably be coached into realizing there are much more ideas inside them than they're aware of.
Yeah.
But then what happens for them is then they will have the problem that the rest of us have,
Yes.
which is, which idea?
Yeah.
What do
Well,
I
that's it.
do?
There's a balance, isn't there? It's too easy to say no to everything.
Yes.
But then once you've
Yes.
got the ideas, you've got to, oh no, I've got to say no. I've still got to say no to 99% of these ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of what you have to do, I think, when you're playing around with ideas is you have to talk about them. You have to talk about them with people. You have to hear what they say. You have to hear your own self say it.
Hmm.
Um, hear what it sounds like when it comes out of your mouth. But I do think increasingly the next step after you do that is not. I mean, yes, you can use data. And there's a lot of things you can do to test your ideas. But again, talking with people aloud about them is a kind of idea testing.
Mm.
So you could be talking to people at like one-on-one conversation, or you could be creating in classic startup style minimum viable product app that can test your hypothesis
Yeah.
that people want an app that lets them, measure their head and be able to custom order a hat or something like that. You could, it's that's a certain kind of like talking to people at some
Yeah.
scale, right? So, but what you have to do, what you eventually have to do with this idea testing, is you have to kind of get in tune with your own feelings about
Mm.
what you really want to be doing. Um, and that, I think, is probably the piece that I've been shittiest at over the years, because I have had a tendency to valorize difficulty.
Uh
If it's really hard, that must mean it's worthwhile.
huh. And it may well be, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want to spend 5 years doing it. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So So all your process, after you do all you talk and then you listen like crazy, and you really have to actually listen to yourself. You have to listen to different feelings, the fears, the delights. You have to make sure this is going to turn you on, because you will burn out so quickly, get miserable so quickly,
Mm.
get cynical so quickly. There's so many ways things start to go wrong inside yourself. And you have to listen to those, because that data is just as important as the data that's out there in the world.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So what then is the thing that keeps you coming back to it every day rather than just going off and getting a corporate job somewhere?
it just feels natural now. It
Okay.
feels natural. Um, it feels like the um, when I think about it, I feel a sense of relief.
That's probably a good guide from something, isn't it?
It is. It's funny. Freud said that humans, the greatest feeling for a human,
Hmm.
for a person, is not pleasure or joy or ecstasy. It's relief from pain. I may sound kind of bleak or cynical,
Yeah.
um, but it's kind of true. Um, and why I think it is true is that those other things can be somewhat fleeting.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Whereas relief from pain is not. The pain, and it kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier about people as they're looking at their lives and looking at their businesses and making
Yeah.
choices about the businesses. Um, After you do all that research, if you do all the talking, if you do all that listening, you have to listen to yourself and listen for pain.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and do not. There is a reason why, like in physical bodies, we have pain. It tells us stop doing that.
Yeah.
All the natural reflex things we do to avoid serious hurt and harm are there for a reason.
Yeah.
And so relief from pain is a very is it might seem like such a negative frame.
Hmm.
We should be seeking joy, not avoiding pain. Um, but it is actually a smart thing to look for. And when you all of a sudden have a sense of like you can breathe,
Mm.
like the idea of coaching for the rest of my life does not instill any apprehension in me whatsoever. Whereas the idea of, let's say, even as fabulous as the experience of running Soft Skull was, if I was told you're going to do this for the rest of your life, I'd be like, no, I don't want to. No, not quite that, please. As fabulous
Yeah.
as Small Demons, which is certainly, I think, the most brilliant startup idea that has ever existed in publishing. If I was still told, okay, Small Demons for the next 35 years, or it fails, I'll be like, God damn it, I guess it's got to fail, because I do not want to do this for 35 years.
Yeah.
But I was told coaching for 35 years, that's great, no
Yeah.
problem. I get to
Brilliant.
meet interesting people. I get to engage with all kinds of different problems. Every month will be a little different. I will learn so much. That does not instill apprehension in me.
Great. Well, that's a fantastic climax to that. Thanks so much for your time, Richard. That was wonderful.
My pleasure, John. My pleasure. Thanks for doing this.
This was Talking Through My Hat, a podcast by John Pettigrew, founder of We Are Future Proofs. Please let me know your thoughts by leaving a review at Apple Podcasts or by commenting on the website myhat.wearefutureproofs.com. You can subscribe to this channel at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme music is from hooksounds.com.